If your school is anything like mine, then they probably run vocational courses. If you're a student on one of these vocational courses, then the chances are you will be asked at some time to respond to a brief. It can sometimes seem like this is just extra busy work or something that people don't really do in the real world, but this often happens invisibly, behind the scenes, with a team of professionals discussing exactly how they're going to solve a particular problem. Whether it's planning meetings, script supervision sessions, or just sketching up an outline of what your final design is going to look like, knowing how you will respond to the brief is the first, most important decision you will make. This video explains some techniques for doing this and runs through a couple of examples with exam board mark schemes, showing you how to pick up the most marks for this sort of activity. It can be helpful to view briefs as a list of problems, each of which requires a solution. The first thing to do is break the brief down into technical requirements and creative decisions. Go through the brief and highlight both. The technical requirements are a list of must-haves, and there's often not much room for interpretation here. But the creative decisions allow you to put your own spin on the project, and these are often the most fun. Let's do this with a brief that I put together for my games design students. This brief asks students to design a 3D environment for a zombie survival game. So if we break this down a little bit, we can see some of the technical constraints coming in early on. First of all, this is a journeyman project, which means I'm going to be working closely with other people, and all of the models must fit together. This means they're all going to have to be the same size, or at least the bits that join together are going to have to be the same size. You could imagine that the street sections might all be different lengths, but they have to be exactly the same width. Some of the research here is flagged up for you, including photographs that give you ideas and photographs that will actually be used as textures. Taking precise measurements is also a key requirement. This section is a little get-out clause. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it should preserve the look and feel. Justifying what counts as the right look and feel is something that you can cover in your response to the brief. This particular brief has a requirement that you're expected to model the fronts of buildings appropriate to your section and to include one interior as well as an exterior. All of these might be considered technical requirements. There are more technical requirements down here that I'm not going to go into in a tremendous amount of detail for the purposes of this brief. My students will know that they have to work within the numbers that they've been given here. The creative part of the brief is here. In the near future, I'm going to highlight this. How near? What sort of technology do we have? If we're in the future, this gives me the opportunity to think about how technology and society might have changed. The national electricity grid has collapsed. This gives me all sorts of opportunities when I'm creating this street to think about how and where power is coming from. Everything is powered by generators. But what's powering those? Are they petrol or diesel generators? Or in the near future, have we found a different source of energy? Perhaps they're solar powered and charge up in the day. These will all have effects on how I choose to model the scene. Centres of civilian population have been overrun. This suggests that there will be lots and lots of zombies in this section of the game, and I'll need to plan accordingly. The mention of gangs, specifically juvies, gives me all sorts of opportunities to think about how roving gangs of young people might manipulate their environment, customise the area that they live in, and hold on to territory against other roving gangs of young people and the zombies. The idea that anything can be used as a weapon invites me to think about what I might litter the scene with. Iron bars, metal grills, wooden stakes, anything can be used as a weapon. Government and military secrets have been exposed. This gives me an opportunity to think about what has caused the zombie apocalypse. Is it a government experiment gone wrong? Is it a military UFO secret that's got out of hand? I can factor all of these things into my final design. The mention of batteries and lights in this scene suggests that lighting might be portable, which will have knock-on effects for what sorts of lights I choose to use in this game's design brief. The reference to Molotovs, hand cannons and rockets suggests that there will be a lot of combat in this game, and I should factor this into my environment design. If there is combat now, there has surely been combat before, and the signs of combat, bodies, blood, fire damage, explosion damage, will be seen in the streets. Finally, the mention of stealth, strategy, and brute force seems to suggest 3 different ways that I might interpret my section, remembering that my section is going to be joined up with other people's sections. I could quite conceivably create a stealth section where someone else has a section that you just have to fight your way through. So if we dip out of this close focused analysis, we can return to the general approach to interpreting a brief. You are not expected to invent something completely from scratch, so the second thing to do is to look at some other examples of your product as part of research. Keep a record of everything you researched and where to find it again, as you never know if you might need it or not. It's important to store links, to name each file, and to organise them into folders where you can find them. Seeing how others do things will really help you get an idea of what is and what is not a good idea. Now that you've seen some examples of similar finished products, we can go back to those creative decisions that you highlighted and think about how they might drive ideas to do the sort of project that you need to do. Again, here's an example. So what I've done here is I've taken the individual phrases that I highlighted from the brief for the creative section, and I've dropped each one into its own slide on a PowerPoint. And I'm now going to go through what I might do next. The near future is a polluted, overcrowded place. There is much social unrest, and government crackdowns are a regular thing. As money and banking have collapsed, people trade junk. Several games have done this, most notably the Fallout series. The juvie gangs will regularly raid and protect trash heaps. I will make sure to model a trash heap in my environment and to have juvies defend it. The player will need to find an item here. I also want to show signs of social unrest before the outbreak. There will be bodies of police in riot gear. Most of the gear will have been taken, but the bodies will not have been eaten, indicating that they were killed before the zombie outbreak. Okay, so you can see here I have done 3 slides as examples of the sorts of things that I might say. I'm not going to go through all of them because that would take far too long. Here we've done this one already, so I'm not going to spend any time talking about it now. Here, the national electricity grid has collapsed and everything is powered by generators. This is the prompt that I've been given by the brief. So I've done a little bit of research into what portable solar-powered generators look like, because this is the near future after all. So what I've written is, I will model generators similar to these as there is no electricity in my game. I'm explaining and linking back to what they've said in the brief. These would likely be very precious objects in the post-apocalyptic world. I'm thinking through how this is going to fit in my game here. Obviously, if you've got one of these, you've got electricity, you're going to look after it, you're going to defend it, you're going to guard it. When they are found in the game, they will indicate that people are nearby. But whether those people are friendly or threats will make the player act cautiously here. So what I'm trying to do is flesh out my idea for the game world based on this particular bit of the brief. I've got another example here. Gangs, the worst of them the juvies. I will use gang tags similar to these that I've researched to indicate when the player is moving into juvie territory. As the player moves into different areas, there will be different tags, indicating different gangs control these areas. I will liaise with the other, that should not say players, that should say designers, to develop a rich backstory of a post-apocalyptic society. So I'm going to talk to the other people, because this is a journeyman project, I'm going to talk to the other people who are modelling the different sections and say, right, I'm going to have the kings or the crowns or the stashes or whatever you want to call them. I'm going to have these guys in my group. I'm going to have LK in my section. All right, well, we're going to have 66C in ours. Okay, so now what's the story between these two gangs of juvies? And how can that story play out in my environment? If you want to top grade, you've got to start thinking about how little things like this can start to feed into the story. Some people ask me where I get my ideas from. Well, there are a whole range of planning tools that can help at this stage. One of my favourites is mood music, finding the right kind of music to put you in the right kind of mood to make whatever it is you're making. Another tool is a mood board. These can be incredibly useful for gaining an idea of the sorts of things that get made and the sorts of colour palettes that tend to be used. Sketches, maps, outlines, and other visualisation documents can be very helpful too, and you can often download ideas before making your own. Depending on what you're making, a character biography or background might be suitable, or a scenario for the particular story, world, or context in which your media product is set. Even scripts and storyboards may be appropriate depending on what you're making. Finally, we can now return to the technical requirements and make sure that we can fit every one of them into our ideas, or at least that our ideas don't contradict something that we've been asked to do. Finally, we can start to take a look at mark schemes, like this one from the BTEC Games Design course. Most mark schemes will have marks at different standards, like pass, merit, and distinction. Let me just expand this a little bit. Whether you get a pass, merit, or distinction grade is usually determined by two things. First of all, how much work did you produce? And secondly, how detailed, clear, or good is the work. If we take a look at this mark scheme here, at the base level for pass standard, it will say student produce plans that are appropriate and fit for purpose. You were asked to create some scenes for a zombie game. Have you managed to do it? Do they look like they belong in a zombie game? Okay, basic pass. Moving up, students will create detailed plans. The definition of detailed will be determined by your teacher and whoever checks their work. At the highest level, distinction, it will be a comprehensive plan. You will have thought of everything. There'll be a high level of detail. So the difference here is, I've done the bare minimum bog standard. It looks like I'm making a zombie game. I've created some detail, added some detail to my plans. I've thought of everything I could possibly think of and done everything in a massive amount of detail. It's the same for other requirements. Environment design may not be accurately to scale and may lack clear dimensions. This here is a clear indication that in order to get anything above a pass, you have to have the scale and the dimensions somewhere on your planning. Moving up here, you can see they will have clear dimensions roughly to scale. At the highest level, it will be an accurate scale design of the environment, which means if you've sketched something out by hand and you haven't put any measurements on there, you're probably going to get this grade down here. They've identified some library assets, things that they want to download for this course. Higher grade, identify and locate on the design. This means that it will be labelled. Where you're going to use the assets will be clearly indicated somewhere in your design and plan. It won't just be, oh, here's a brick texture. It'll be, I'm going to use this brick texture on this wall, and this wall, but this wall and this wall are going to get paint, and this wall and this wall are going to get concrete. The difference between merit and distinction here is that you will identify all the intended library assets with all additional graphics. It's this level of work applied consistently across all of the planning. Finally, we get into some of the technical requirements. At pass grade, if you've done a UV and a tiling material, but none of the others, then you'll hit pass grade. If you've done a UV and a tiling material and either a decal or a particle texture, then you'll hit the next grade up. And finally, if you've done a UV and a tiling and a decal and a particle texture, then you're eligible for distinction standard. Of course, the quality of these textures determines which grade you're going to get as well. So let's get into that. The key part of any mark scheme are the subjective words, the words that are left open to the interpretation of the teacher. Things like detail, general, What's considered as detail and general will be determined by the person marking your work and the person checking their work. A little bit further up, we can see that there's a clear sense. It'll be shown visually, verbally, or a combination. The overall look will be clear. Again, the definition of clear will be set by your teacher, and they should communicate this to you when putting the project across. At the highest level, comprehensive, unequivocal, detailed, and interesting are the keywords. And it's these keywords that are really used to determine the quality, even if you have ticked all of the technical boxes up at the top. It's useful to look at this in other mark schemes as well, like this OCR mark scheme from this website here. If we take a look at the planning grades, you can see they've highlighted what these subjective words are, these words that are open to interpretation. And again, few requirements, limited identification. You've done a little bit. Mostly, clear, some relevant. Finally, fully, clear and detailed, clearly drawn upon relevant skills and knowledge. I'm just going to pick one of these threads here to illustrate what the difference might be. A limited identification of target audience requirements is going to be saying something like, I've made a horror film poster for horror film fans aged 16 to 35. There's a limited identification of target audience, but you haven't really talked about any of the reasons why that group might like the particular thing you're going to make. Moving across over to here, a clear identification of target audience requirements. This might be something like, I'm going to aim it at 16 to 35-year-old males who are existing fans of the horror genre. In order to target this existing fan of the horror genre, I'm going to have a bit on my poster that says, from the director of the Saw movies, or Paranormal Activity, or some other big hit that's clearly targeting existing fans of the horror genre. Finally over here, clear and detailed, I would say something like, I'm aiming this at 16 to 35-year-old existing fans of the horror genre. I've done some research here on this website, here on this website, and here on this website, and they all say that this demographic, mostly males, are interested in horror. Here's my research, here's my evidence, and here's how I'm going to put that on the page. The difference is I've got a basic idea, I've had a little bit of thought and made it clear what this target audience want. They want this film to build on an existing successful horror franchise. And finally over here, I've got clear and detailed research. I've found out exactly what this audience wants. They want ghost stories, they want werewolves, they want vampires, so I'm going to make sure I do a ghost, werewolf, vampire story. But everything I'm saying is coming from the research. Thank you very much for watching this video on how to interpret a brief and create planning and pre-production materials. If there are any issues at all, do please feel free to get in touch in the comments.